Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had about the 2025 team principals. We're diving into how the teams and team principals performed in 2025 and sharing our annual end-of-year report cards. But before we get into our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Dick, we are doing now what I am assuming when it gets released, it'll be the second one, but it might not be because, we may change our minds.
That's right.
But yes, we're now doing the second part of our tradition of doing a report card at the end of the season. Are
Yep.
you looking forward to this one?
I am, because what I learned is that I am a much harsher grader professor than you are. And so I'll be very interested to see, I beat up several of the drivers in our conversation when we were grading them. Here we have 10 teams, and I certainly have some pointed comments at those guys too. So let's see what happens here.
Do you think that it will hold, that I will be easier than you?
Because we're talking about a team
Hmm.
versus a driver, and I know that, and I love this about you, but you're a fangirl, let's face it. You're kinder to these guys. There's,
Hmm.
to me, as a racer, I'm going to be a little more jaded and cynical, and let's be fair here, a little bit envious and jealous because they're
Mm.
doing what I thought I was going to do. So that's another story,
Hmm.
though.
That's a really good insight into the two of us. You're right. I do look at the racers as like, especially because of their ages, like my kid brother and anybody who's in my circle, I always want to see them succeed. And I think positive feedback, even when it's criticism, the way you message it is always impactful and delivering what you want to say versus being super harsh. So yeah, maybe that came out in my report card. For those who haven't listened to it because we don't know where this is falling, it's just all the more incentive to see, was I too nice? Was Dick too hard? And then now in this one that we're going to do of our 10 teams, will that hold? So let's get started on this, Dick. We have 10 teams. We're going to go down the standings. We're going to look at this. I think you said it well in our other recording, which is this is a bit subjective. There isn't like a clear formula, but it's really our opinion. And we're trying to be fair and objective, but it is subjective. And I
Hmm.
think that for us, there are data points that we may look at. I know that I went and watched all the race highlights for the 2024 season, at least up until I would say about 20 of them, just trying to refresh my brain because golly, 24 races, I'm so exhausted. And trying to remember at the early part of the season, what were our predictions, what were our thoughts and expectations.
Hmm.
So we also in our past years have kind of taken the approach of if you were the team principal, what would you be saying at the year end meetings? Or if we had the opportunity to talk to a team principal, what would we be saying? We've kind of done both of these different in the 2 years that we've had this. We've done it both ways. I did have in my notes the principals' names. I don't know if it'll necessarily come up that I want to be talking to them, but hey, if they're listening, we'll be happy to give our opinion. Uh,
Absolutely.
so anything else I'm overlooking, Dick, in setting this table?
No, I
Okay.
think we get right into it.
Okay.
I think you covered it very well.
Fantastic. Okay, so then our first team, the winner of the Constructors Championship, McLaren. What are your thoughts, Dick?
Well, they're the double world champions, right? The constructors and the driving championship. And so you got to give them an A. I feel like the team at their home base at the McLaren Technical Center has really, in the last couple of years, done just an amazing job of producing a car that really works, that has been optimized to the rule set. And I think what they've done is truly impressive considering where they were just a few short years ago, where they were struggling in the midfield. Now they are the pace setters. So I think you have to give them a lot of credit. Of course, fun fact, I worked a little bit for Zach Brown 20 years ago, and I like the guy. He was always very, very good to me and the guys that my colleagues that were working for him on some special programs that he was doing. So I really like Zach. So I think to see him come in and do what was really a CEO turnaround job has been really fun to see. For those reasons, I got to give him big points. Now, if I'm Zach, and I think any of the team principals of the top teams, I think they should say, "Hey, hope you enjoyed it this year. New rule set coming in 2026. Our laurels from the previous year always mean pretty close to nothing. They really mean nothing starting in 2026." And so I think that his challenge is going to be get everybody at that same level of motivation and doing the hard work. So anyway, but that's my take on McLaren.
Well, I like a lot of what you said. You said you're giving them an A.
Yep.
I am also giving them an A. And not an A plus, not an A minus, but just a straight A.
Yep.
Largely because I feel like a lot of the things that you said, which is the Woking team had a fantastic year of developing that car, and the race team consistently delivered. That said, they had some serious miscalculations and gaffes,
Woo,
and that
big time.
was, yeah, especially towards the end of the year. But I mean, there were some even in the middle of the year, and that could have potentially derailed them. But they did attempt to very quickly fix that. And overall, they attempted to rewrite the playbook of what it means to be a racing team, like the whole papaya
Hmm.
rules. And time will tell if that playbook was really valid for this one season or it really is truly changing the way teams race in general.
Yep.
Like, could this be a new setter? I
Yep.
will say, like, so in my notes, I wrote for each of the teams, I had like a little phrase, and for me, McLaren was unforced errors. And
Hmm.
if that had not been the case, it would have really been an absolutely beautiful year
Yep.
to have both the constructors championship and the drivers championship
Yep.
would have been just wonderful. But,
Yep.
next year, who knows? Maybe they could surprise me in their continuity and how they grab a hold of these regs and blow us all out of the water. So
Yep.
that's that for me.
Yeah. And I would just, as a postscript on my comments, I think, first of all, you're 100% right. There were unforced errors. And that's what kept me from giving them an A plus, because I feel like they did a fantastic job delivering a car that stayed ahead of the opposition, and it was good enough all year long to get both of the world championships. And so it was almost like the team at home made up for the errors that the race team made.
Yeah, like that's what I meant by the Woking team. Like the
Yep.
factory
Yep.
really just set it in such a level that I think that it kept that margin enough. And even when it comes to the race team, I would even argue that because of the pace with which we expect the teams to operate at such a high level consistently a year now, you can have a level of empathy that they're not going to call it perfectly and be
Yep.
excellent because a little bit less racing, as much as hard as that sounds, might actually have the effect of bringing it even to a higher optimization. And I said this in our race review. I just can't imagine how physically difficult this is for these teams to be
Yeah.
hopscotching. Even though we've changed the calendar quite a bit, we're human still.
Sure.
So I that's why I give McLaren the A with the qualifiers and saying the fact that you were still able to wrestle that championship.
Yep.
Kudos to you. And they did it with such high margins as well between them
Yep.
and the next team, which is Mercedes. So what are your thoughts with Mercedes?
Well, I think Mercedes actually maybe surprised a few people and maybe even themselves just a little bit, because I had a hard time all year long trying to decide whether Mercedes had made a jump forward or was it because Red Bull and Ferrari fell backwards. Of course, Red Bull, that's a whole nother story because they won a lot of races. But at the end of the day, I felt like they did a really solid job in that the guy that is most synonymous with Mercedes and Formula One, Lewis Hamilton, left for Ferrari, and his place was taken by a very raw, very young rookie. And yet, what we saw was a sneak. I've been calling him this all year long. George Russell was sneakily consistent. It was just sort of like nothing flashy. He just, when the car was able to deliver, he was there. And when it wasn't able to deliver, then he was thereabouts. So George was always lurking at what I call there or thereabouts. Kimi, of course, as a rookie, kind of up and down, but Toto did a fantastic job of just nurturing that kid and inspiring confidence in him and all that kind of good stuff that any driver needs, but especially a young rookie. I was just super impressed by Toto. And as a sidebar, I really feel like James Vowles probably has learned so much from Toto because an awful lot of his management style sure looks like Toto. All that said, they did not produce the fastest car. That was the negative, and I use negative in air quotes there because the McLaren was so exemplary. Yeah, I would give Mercedes I don't know, a B or a B plus maybe because they did the job.
Yeah. Well, I think that we're actually in agreement in the B range. I gave them a straight B.
Hmm.
And for me, the phrase I thought of is the cheese stands alone. With a lot of the visual, the association that comes with Lewis and Mercedes, to have Lewis leave, it was a great loss to that team. But they
Yep.
sent him off well and they accepted Kimmy. And moreover, they knew they could rely on George.
Yep.
And in that sense, it was all those people who had to have felt that gap that could have really looked in on themselves and felt really sorry, frustrated, started to look elsewhere. But instead, they all battened down and said, we're going to make this work. And I think I told you I started, I'm almost through because I've stopped and started a couple of different books. But the book Inside Mercedes F1, I thought it was very interesting. This is during the time when Mercedes isn't doing that great and is what's being cataloged in the book. And
Hmm.
so for me, as I was watching this year, I had that kind of sitting in the back of my head. This is a team that knows how to do good, how to win, and they have to be frustrated right now that they're not at the front and they're not producing, but they have an eye towards the fact that they have 2026 and that is a reset that is going to be a good equalizer. And then knowing what we are hearing over and over is that the Mercedes power unit is the one to want for the
Right.
beginning of the year. That also made me think then they've made a calculated decision that they will take the gains where they can, put their heads down, and just focus on just enduring through 2025. They know it's a
Yep.
transition year of
Yep.
Kimmy's going to need time. George is coming into his own. We're positioning it in such a way that we can truly surge. I didn't have time to look at this, but before the Lewis Hamilton Mercedes dominance, what was Mercedes doing? And are we looking at a repeat or an echo of that? But
Hmm.
my instinct says that there's probably an echo to this. I also think that they didn't lose their eye on the current prize of being in a place where they were positioned to take advantage of opportunities, even when they may have been feeling like they were pushing themselves to the limit, in the sense
Right.
that they wanted to win this, they wanted to do well this year. They had to have been divided in how much do you focus, not just development, but just in general. How much do you really truly put towards winning in 25 versus our energy needs to also be thinking to 26, unlike other
Hmm.
years where you're changing, knowing that they're going to be that supplier for a power unit to multiple customers and what that will say for their brand if they
Right.
don't turn it out. Those kinds of things are calculations that I don't think their customers are thinking about. I definitely don't think Ferrari's having to grapple with. And I don't think that Red Bull, even though they're doing their own power unit, they're not having to think about what is the long standing history of their brand. And that if they do not do this well, what will that mean to the bottom line in their future? And so
Hmm.
I think Mercedes had to have made some type of calculation of we only have this much time, focus, people, resources, even though they expend a lot of resources, like so I was really kind of impressed with the ability to be so resilient because I
Hmm.
don't necessarily know that all teams would have that, but I think because you've seen a level of stability in their team despite the loss, like the overall configuration seems to have stayed stable. And so I
Right.
think that'll be very interesting to see if that bodes well for them in 26. And I hope that as they're having their end of year, they're feeling like they're on the precipice of coming back in a resurgence and that they're
Hmm.
not going to be the Chiefs standing alone. Okay. Let me move on to Red Bull. What are your thoughts?
The word I would use with them is chaos. Yeah, they produced a car again that Max used very effectively, fell short. What was it, 2 points in the World Driving Championship to Lando? The absolute chaos that was going on, the Christian Horner thing, is Max staying in 26? What's going on with Helmut Marko? The clear political power that Jos Verstappen has. Then you talk about the disaster in the second seat, basically the partial destruction of Liam Lawson and the total destruction of Yuki. The only saving grace was is that Max was competitive. If it had been anybody else in that car, we would not be talking about Red Bull finishing third in the Constructors' Championship. There's no way. They had, in my mind, some internal politics that was rivaled by, say, Alpine. All that said, though, they got at least results on track with one car, but I would suggest that's because they have Max, not because they did such a fantastic job. Now, don't get me wrong, Red Bull is still very, very good. They were out of control. I give them a B minus, and I feel like that's charitable.
Well, I gave him a B.
Hmm.
I think that hopefully, because the news just hit, again, we don't know when this is going to be released, but the news just hit this week that Helmut Marko has been released or he has decided to leave. Depends on who you listen to, determines
Right.
which one it is. But regardless, he's no longer with the team. I think for me, the word that I kept coming back to was succession, like the TV show, the succession battle that has been a result of this civil war inside the team.
Yep.
Ultimately, this saga, I think, has finally closed the chapter, and now you are seeing a Red Bull that is a corporate entity.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that will mean. I know that for them as a racing team, I know what it means oftentimes when you see a business transition into a corporate entity and what that could bode, and it's not generally pleasant.
Hmm.
So, with all of this chaos that you just described, I'm a little concerned for them because the nimbleness that I think you need to have inside of this sport and decision making and galvanizing your team, I just don't know that a corporate entity really can
Yeah.
do that. That
Yeah.
said, Laurent Mekies has seemed to come in
Yep.
and may know how to navigate that. And because he came from the sister team, has relationships that I think that probably will bode well. I think that there's just a lot with that power unit that they're trying to do. Man, if it's not good, I feel like they're sunk. And that concerns me, but we'll just have to wait and see. And that's the future. But for this year, looking at the fact that they came out at P3 again last year, but last year they had so many more points that also to me, when I was looking at the stats, I thought, oh, that's gotta hurt for them, for a team that is accustomed to winning and not winning. And the, again, expecting those bonuses, all that stuff. It's just going to be a hard year. And I think everyone probably just wants the chapter to close, at least those who are remaining there. And for those who are remaining there, I hope that they stay strong and work together and can really rehabilitate the culture there. And I commend them for sticking with the team and believing that they can revive it.
Yep.
So the next one is Ferrari. What are your thoughts?
Well, we're back to the circular firing squad. I had had so much hope for Ferrari because they had pulled together a pretty darn good season in 24, and then it just kind of went all wrong, didn't it? And it may be because they said, hey, I don't know, March, April, May, somewhere in that time frame, they made the decision, hey, we're not going to go and develop our car anymore. We're going to start focusing on 2026 because it's such a sweeping rules change, right? And so they may have very well taken the stance of we're going to suffer this year for the greater good of the following seasons to come. And if that's the case, so be it. But boy, from the outside looking in, it really didn't look very good. They had all sorts of hope with Lewis coming on board, and indeed, he won the sprint race in China early in the season. We were like, oh man, this is going to wind up being really, really good. And then it kind of all just kind of drifted sideways. I mean, Charles had some moments of brilliance. And quite frankly, Lewis did too. He had some races there towards the end of the year where, the car was kind of coming around to his liking. And you could see it in the performance. I mean, it may have been Abu Dhabi where he didn't make it out of Q1, but man, he fought up through the field. And I think on track, he gained more positions than anybody and scored good points for Ferrari. So there were some moments, but generally speaking, it wasn't like there were strategy problems or anything. They were kind of like the reverse of McLaren in that we said that, McLaren and Woking, they were the ones that made up for the race team's errors. Well, I think in this case, the race team was actually pretty good, but Maranello wasn't so great. So I could give them a C. I could argue a C minus, but they definitely regressed in 2025.
Yeah, I like how you pointed out the distinction between McLaren, Woking, Ferrari, Maranello. I think that's a great point. And I don't think that 2 or 3 years ago, I would have thought we'd be commending the race team because we saw such blunders. But then now for them to have improved, that's wonderful. And I'm really glad for that. And I think that that's probably something that's encouraging to someone like Charles, who's been with the team. And that I think that speaks a lot to Fred and his leadership. I think when I look at the 24 season and compare that with the 25 season, Ferrari was in P2 last year. That's hard to see them now at P4 and
Yep.
to almost, I think it's almost half of the points that they had last year. So what
Wow.
I had written down, again, we all know I'm not the math girl, but what is it? 652 is what they had last year. And this year that's 398. That's just disappointing regression. The expectations after getting the constructors last year would be that the team would have gone from strength to strength, not to mention the acquisition of Lewis Hamilton, rather than bringing themselves forward and truly challenging themselves. I think it seems like they've had institutional decay. You clearly have the capacity to challenge. I mean, they have had moments in this year and definitely last year where Fred was able to extract some really good things. But I have to wonder, was last year's success, the expectation, anticipation of Lewis coming, did it create these parochial interest that this year where they wanted to tighten the control and this expectation that, if I don't prove my worth or, like just holding on to things versus working together as a seamless team, did
Yeah.
that actually harm them in whatever they had created last year? And
Yeah.
so that it's disappointing. I hope that next year will be better, but unfortunately I have absolutely no enthusiasm to believe that narrative.
Hmm. Right.
And I'll be pleasantly surprised. Like if I were in Charles's camp, I'd be saying you need to be looking elsewhere and having quiet conversations because he's not at a point where he can sit there any longer when he's watching George, his peer, who very possibly is going to have a great car under him and be able to challenge for the drivers' championship.
Yep.
And then you have Orlando and Oscar in McLaren, those three right there. And then you still have Max.
Yep.
So, but I don't know where those options are for someone like Charles at this point. So
Yeah.
that's my
Yep.
thoughts. I
Yeah.
give
No.
Ferrari a C. I think I
Yep.
said that, but I want to double check.
Yep. No, no arguments on that one. I like your logic. And
Okay.
I do think Charles, if Ferrari can't deliver in 26, Charles has to bail. He doesn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a certain point where the loyalty is no longer being rewarded, and
Yeah.
he's the one bearing the burden of that.
Yeah. Unless Ferrari is willing to pay him a whole lot of money and he's happy collecting a big paycheck and knowing that he's not going to have any results. So that's the
Yeah,
other
but you're
part.
a racer. Could you stomach that?
No way.
Yeah. I don't think, especially someone who has had so much aspirations, like
Yeah.
his whole family, his story, like his brother gave up his racing career to let Charles go first because they couldn't financially juggle both. And now Arthur's coming in. I just can't imagine Charles would be happy to just simply take a check. It just
Yep.
doesn't strike me. But this isn't
Yep.
about Charles. We are talking about Ferrari. I will move us on to Williams. What are your thoughts?
Well, I have always been a Williams fan. And now that Williams is, man, it just feels like they've got momentum on their side. And, they're going to be getting Mercedes engines for next year. And I don't know, man. I mean, what they have done is so impressive. And of course, I put a lot of that on James Vowles coming in and just not only leading well, but seeing to it that new systems and processes are put in place. And no longer are they having parts lists on Excel spreadsheets and stuff like that. They're seriously upgrading what they're doing, and it's showing on the track. I'm just seriously impressed. They've got a very talented driver lineup that can carry them forward as the car improves. I felt like their season was very solid, very impressive if you consider where they've come from over the last, say, 5 years. Remarkable. I give them a B plus.
Okay. I gave him a B.
Okay.
I think that first off, who would have truly believed that Williams could make it back to the midfield, just especially so quickly? And I
Yep.
agree with you that I think it is James Vowles. They've clearly been doing the work of untangling all those longstanding issues, and
Yep.
that's giving the team at Grove to really fight and bring a car to the team, and then the team is executing at the track in a very
Yep.
good way. I think they've had some fumbles, but nothing, super dramatic that you're sitting here going face palm, oh gosh, what was this? But again, it goes back to what I think of just the longevity of the racing year. And I think that they're on track and holding steady, and that momentum, I think, will allow them to really rehab this culture, and they've created a new environment for themselves, and they've also created some stability. I think you saw the stability over the year that they just were able to, they hunker down a bit. And I think that gave their drivers the ability to really shine. And both of them challenge each other good. And surprisingly, even though the two podiums came from Carlos, it's Alex who actually is still in the standings ahead, which I think
Right.
speaks to just the team dynamic. As much as everyone's talked about papaya rules, I wonder if there's internal Williams rules that they just haven't needed to broadcast because
Right.
that hasn't been the conversation. But
Yep.
it seems very organic to have that
Yep.
fairness. And I
Yep.
think does go back to James's style, which probably is a derivative of Mercedes. So I'm really
Yep.
looking forward to it. I think ultimately it's like, wow, who would have thought this 4 years ago? I don't think
Right.
anybody would have expected this
No.
kind of resurgence. So I think it's
Nope.
great. So mine is
Yep.
a B.
Okay.
Then let's move on to Racing Bulls.
I would give them a good solid B. I feel like they also had to deflect some of the chaos coming from Red Bull in that, they lost their team principal, in the middle of the year, but they stepped up and they were able to really kind of move forward from there, which says to me that they had hired good people who were able to step into other roles if called upon. I thought that was impressive. The car was obviously pretty good in some places. I thought they did a great job. Laurent Mekies, especially while he was still team principal, did a really great job of helping Liam Lawson to, get his head back in the game after having to deal with Red Bull and all that. So I felt like they were pretty darn solid all year long. Not to say that they didn't have some races where they didn't do well because the car wasn't suited to the track. But, at this stage, talking midfield, I thought they had a really solid year. So I give them a B.
Yeah, I gave him a B as well. And I gave it to him because the words I wrote were musical chairs. You
Mm,
didn't know who was going to be the team principal. You didn't know who was in the racing seats. But despite all those changes, the Faenza team had developed, I think, a consistent car. And that stability allowed this junior team to be competitive and additionally to nurture the talent that was in the car. And that's their primary responsibility. Like, I mean, that was their reason for existence, right? Is
yeah,
to be that place for their talent that needs the time to develop. So I think that it to me gives them a high commendation, which is why I think that they deserve a B. I don't know that they're up there at the front of the pack. So
right.
that's why I can't give them an A because they're not competing for constructors. But I wouldn't be surprised if they maintain this level of stability, and with the new driver lineup, could they be coming in there and doing something shocking, I wouldn't totally write them
Yep.
off because
Yep.
if you're able to be consistent and deliver during all the chaos that they have endured, there's no reason to think that with a year of stability wouldn't allow them to finally do some stuff on their own. And that's
Yep.
where they actually benefit from the corporatization. Even though I know they're two distinct teams and all the independence that they want to tell us happens, but there has to be some level of learnings, best practices, sharing that they can pick up from one another that is
Hmm.
within the allowed sharing of information.
Right.
All that said, I would like us to move on to Aston Martin.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, as a Fernando fan, that's a real disappointment. I've got to give them a C. They've got enormous resources. They really underdelivered, and I think Lawrence Stroll feels that way as well. You got to remember, they've had three team principals in the last 2 years. They went from Mike Crack to Andy Cowell to Adrian Newey, and so that doesn't bode well. Although I realize there were reasons for all that, and no one sees Adrian Newey as the permanent solution. It may be like a co-team principal or something like that. So again, they began developing the 2026 car early. About the only thing that I could say that I saw real positive is when they brought new bits to the track, the new bits worked, which says to me that their wind tunnel is correlating with on-track performance, which is like absolutely key, which it's the state of the art piece of equipment. And so if it's correlating, then that means that they certainly have a real future advantage in terms of upgrades and that sort of thing. So that's my take. I give them a C. Kind of wanted to give them a C minus, but I'll give them a C.
Okay. Well, I also gave them a C. And the word that I had written down was they were just confounding to me. With the amount of money that has been invested into this team, I'm shocked that they're not able to put it together. We've all been waiting with bated breath for this team to really surge forward. And at a certain point, we all start to wonder what is holding them back and if they are indeed the team to continue watching. I'm willing to hold out through a good chunk of 26. Maybe the stars have finally aligned. That said, I'm kind of neutral, and
Yep,
that's why I give them a C.
totally get it.
Okay. So then let's move on to Haas.
Haas, to me, had a season very much like Williams in that it was just sort of like you just could just feel this momentum shift with these guys. I was very impressed. Rookie driver and Ollie Behrman and in Esteban Ocon as their team leader. He was kind of has always been a bit of a wild man, and they tamed the wild man and they put together some really solid performances, albeit many of them were track specific, but you can't help but feel like that they're really making some great progress. So I'm going to give them a B minus.
Okay. Well, I was a little bit harsher and I gave them a
The
C.
first time.
I know it's going to come here. I think that their revival continues. That's what I wrote in my
Yeah.
notes. I remain in the belief that Haas is still on an upward trajectory
Yep.
and that last year won't be the only highlight in their new era. That said,
Hmm.
I do think that they got that low-hanging fruit last year. And this year was hard because they were likely addressing some bigger systemic issues, not to mention their focus had to be divided between the 26 and 25 year. And for a smaller team, not to mention one that's working between the US and Banbury, this splits a lot of their energy, their resources, and really stretches them in a way that I think other teams up the grid that are more established, that are larger, they just don't have to grapple with nearly to the level. It's just a higher intensity, I
Right.
think, for a smaller team like Haas. And I think that that's why they may not have optimized as much as they did, or they could have this year. And it's probably a calculated decision,
Hmm.
knowing what was achievable and where they really wanted to be. And I just think it had to have been a question of allocation. And so I
Yep.
think time will tell, but my hope is that they will do better. And I think that last year being P7 with 58 points, but this year being P8 with 79 points, that even though it's a lower standing, it's the points acquisition that I was quite impressed with this year and
Yep.
thought, okay, that means that they're having more good racing happening and being up there.
Yep.
And I think from our driver points, we know that many times there were instances where they were right there on the cusp. They're
Yep.
individual drivers. That's why they get a C for me.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, Kick Sauber.
This is a team that is going to take on a new identity next year. So this is their last season to be known as Sauber, although as funny as it seems, Sauber has been named after other manufacturers like BMW. And so who knows, we may see the Sauber name come back if Audi loses interest in Formula One. That being said, the season certainly had its highlights. They started off very slow, kind of starting off where they were at the end of last season, but they picked it up. They made some upgrades that worked. They had some good races and their pace was pretty surprising. And then in other races, they were kind of back in the bottom of the field. So kind of an up and down year, but I felt like Hulkenberg and Bortoleto did fine jobs considering their relative experience. Nico's highly experienced, Bortoleto is a rookie. And they were obviously managed really very, very well. And so I saw some good things there, but they were awfully up and down. So I'll give them a C.
Okay. I also gave them a C. And for me, I wrote, I think it's a simmering pot with the lid on it. I
Oh,
think there's a lot going on behind the scenes that Sauber, soon to be Audi, as you noted, is wisely not sharing with the public. I think, especially after last year of being P10 with just 4 points, it was rough. And they must understand that it'd be wiser just to be quiet
yep.
and get the job done, continue the improvement, figure out where they need to make changes and prepare themselves for this transition. I think that they're going to be dripping out more stuff over the winter break. We've already seen a
Hmm.
little bit of it in this last week. I just think
Yep.
that that's going to continue happening. I'm actually just kind of strapping myself in to what I expect and hope will be the rise of a new Audi in a way that knocks everyone's socks off. That's what
Yeah.
I'm hoping for. So even though I feel like a C is can be seen as kind of harsh. I mean, because they did get a podium this year with
With
Nico,
Nico. Yep.
but some of that was actually, I would argue, more Nico than it was the team because Nico was the one that made the call that kind of changed the calculation of where his positioning was going to be. He, like, kind of, when you go back to the onboards, he kind of had a moment of, I'm going to do this. And that really positioned him well. And that's not saying that they don't have good strategic thinking. I think they've actually had a number of instances where the race team has called some really good strategies. I just think overall, we're going to be surprised by how they
Hmm.
come out in
I
the
hope you're
next
right.
year.
I
Yeah,
hope you're right. That'll be
I
really
really.
cool.
I'm kind of hoping they take a little bit of the Williams playbook in that sense.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Last is Alpine.
Oh, man. Well, you certainly can't give them a passing grade. I mean, you'd either have to give them a D or an F in my book. And again, not to denigrate what Gasly did with a really bad, underpowered car and the fact that Colapinto spent most of the year trying to figure out what must be a pretty difficult car to drive. Think of it in terms of maybe a little bit of a mini Red Bull situation. It's not quite the gap between the first and second car, but Gasly could sort of drive it, whereas Colapinto, I think, spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to drive it. Although in the latter parts of the season, there were times when he outqualified and ran in front of Gasly. So that's good. But I think Briatore, I can't really believe that he's been all that helpful. He's too bombastic for this day and age. He was certainly effective back in the day, but I'm not sure that style carries over. I do believe that they may have a more bright future ahead. Now, they clearly were not developing their car this year. They were focused on 26 and a car that had the Mercedes power unit. So they were just, I think, just kind of limping through trying to get to the end of the year, quite frankly, and it showed.
Yeah. I also felt that there was no way to give it a passing grade, and I was an F. I felt bad in the sense that I have high respect for the factory and the race team and for the drivers. I lay this in the hands of the management of this, and the words that I wrote were staggering and dumbfounded. I
Yep.
honestly can't understand how this whole debacle has continued, other than to think that the corporate entity really does not care. It's not being held accountable by its employees or its shareholders. And
Yep.
so I feel sorry for every employee in the factory and the race team, because
Yep.
those are the people that are sacrificing their physical, mental, emotional energy towards trying to execute this car and be out there on that track. And they're the ones who are sacrificing their time from their families. They
Yep.
have, so much
For
that's
nothing.
happening for,
Yeah.
yeah. Like and if anything, I commend those people, the race team and the factory, to continue showing up every day
Hmm.
and putting in the work and saying, I'm gonna keep showing up. That's not easy when you're at the back of the pack. And then when you think of the crashes that they've had to endure, especially the race team having to work over until the curfew, and then the factory having to create the parts that are necessary for these
Yep.
replacements. So that I have a high respect for.
Yep.
But the team, I hope this is not what we continue to see. And if so, I hope that the people in the team racers, factory, all of it, they decide to start looking elsewhere, because you don't need to stay. Like, there's only so much you can pull water out of a sinking ship.
Agreed. My parting shot is you got to believe this team is ripe for a takeover.
I
Yep.
hope so, or a complete change in leadership. But to watch its demise in the way that we're watching it, just
Yeah.
really sad. Okay, so that's the individual report cards. I'd say for me, my headlines would be, ultimately, I think that the teams did okay. I think I gave more C's than I did any other grade. I think that it doesn't take into account that the margins between the teams were extremely close. And it's more about looking at the team as an operation.
Right.
That's why I was grading as I did. If I was looking at, the performances of their cars and their drivers, that would be a little bit different. But I think that we are seeing this reset moment, and that makes me really excited, because
Hmm.
anybody who's a Mercedes customer seems to be situated for being on the edge of really some breakthrough if they can figure out how
Right.
to configure that power unit.
Yep.
Ferrari, I think it's a pivotal moment. Are they going to just continue to spiral out? I hope not. Williams, I'm really cheering for them. Red
Yep.
Bull, it's gone corporate. I don't know what that
Yep.
will look like. I'm kind of not super excited about it, but we'll see if they could surprise us. I mean,
Yep.
this is the team that has been known to do things out of the box. Maybe their way of handling corporate will be that way. Aston, I would say it's time to bring it. There's no more excuses.
Yep.
You have everything, really, it seems like, in front of you. Let's do it.
Yep.
With Haas, I think they could be a contender. Sauber, now Audi. I'm really intrigued to know what this could bring. Same thing for Racing Bulls and McLaren. I really curious to see how will this next year, with all the changes they have endured and are kind of anomalies on their grid, what could that mean for their future of F1?
Uh-huh.
Could they really, like in the case of McLaren, could they truly dominate? In the case of Racing Bulls, could they surge in a way that doesn't put them in a quote junior position, but
Right.
really become a breakout? And then Alpine, I have absolutely the lowest of expectations. And that makes me sad, because that's not what I want Formula One to be.
No, agreed. Well, they'll get it
Okay.
together.
Yeah,
Somebody will.
hopefully. So, what
Yep.
are your headlines, and how do you, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would go with any other thoughts more than anything else, and that is that we've seen a very interesting formula that produced a very unique car over the last few seasons. Some drivers were able to drive it and adapt. Other drivers struggled with it. Almost all of the drivers are not sorry to see this car go. And so, with that car going and that power unit going, it now leads to a whole new set of regulations that we've kind of touched on. We're going to do a conversation about that in the very near future. I think it's going to be very, very interesting because I think Formula One itself is at a crossroads. If this rule set doesn't work, they're going to have a massive and very expensive and very visible problem on their hands. And I would love to be wrong, But will the competitive order get reset? I think most definitely it will. I think based on the rumors and all that kind of stuff, I think Mercedes is probably going to be the team to beat. Or maybe I should say a Mercedes powered car is going to be the team to beat. But you got to believe that the work that has been going on since March or April is still going on, even though the season is over with, because we're only about 5 weeks away from the cars running for the first time. So it ought to be very interesting as we close out one era and open turn the page to a new era. I think it's going to be very interesting.
I agree. And I look forward to our next conversation, Dick.
Likewise. We'll talk soon.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina@2guysaGirlandF1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.